Good evening, and welcome to the Sleepy Geographer. Tonight's topic is capital cities, clear, gently told facts about how they came to be, where they rest on the map, and the little quirks that make each one unforgettable. Before we get started, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. If this helps you unwind, a quiet like and a subscribe help the channel drift a little further, and a warm thank you to everyone already subscribed. May this be soothing enough to nudge your eyelids towards sleep, yet if curiosity keeps them open a while longer, at least the night will carry you away a touch wiser. Now, a thought to tuck under the pillow. Which capital completely surrounds another country, and which one sits below the level of the sea? Settle in and let the pace slow. This video moves through calm, self-contained facts, each one followed by a brief explanation that shows what the detail means on the ground. Expect names you know, and a few that surprise. Ridgetop strongholds, river bends turned into seats of power, coastal harbours that shaped trade, and purpose-built districts where avenues line up with distant hills. The aim is simple, light, accurate, unhurried. Listen as long as is comfortable. If sleep arrives, the next fact will still make sense when the morning finds you again. Where better to start than with the oldest and first capitals, the cities whose timelines run so far back that history feels like the everyday. In Syria, Damascus is widely regarded as the world's longest continuously inhabited capital. People were settled around its oasis by the 7th millennium BCE. The name appears in text from the 2nd millennium BCE, and it rose to imperial status in 661 CE as the seat of the Umayyad Caliphate. The explanation for such persistence is geographic: reliable water from the Berada River in an otherwise dry landscape, sheltering hills, and fertile gardens that fed trade and administration. The city's fabric makes the continuity easy to read. Roman gates beside early Islamic courtyards, Ottoman houses near modern avenues, each era adding to a functioning capital rather than replacing it. As a case study, Damascus shows how a defensible site with dependable water can sustain political centrality across more than 8,000 years of human presence. Across the Aegean, Athens in Greece offers a different kind of longevity. Continuous civic identity tied to a name that never fell out of use. Settlement on and around the Acropolis reaches back to at least the 4th millennium BCE, with a Mycenaean citadel in place by the 2nd millennium BCE. The classical institutions that shaped later democracies, assembly, law courts, theatre, were anchored in specific urban spaces, and the city's story continued well beyond that golden age. In 1834 it was chosen as the capital of the modern Greek state, linking an ancient core to new boulevards and to the port of Piraeus. Today, archaeological zones, neoclassical public buildings, and 20th century housing site side by side, illustrating how a capital can adapt repeatedly while keeping a recognizable civic personality that spans more than 6,000 years of settlement. On the ridgetops of the southern Levant, Jerusalem stands out as one of the world's oldest religious capitals. Urban life is documented from the early Bronze Age in the 3rd millennium BCE. Egyptian records mention the city in the 2nd millennium BCE, and, according to biblical tradition, King David established it as a political and spiritual centre around 1000 BCE. Compact topography concentrated power, defensible hills, the Gihon spring for water, and valleys that guided walls and streets. Today it serves as the seat of Israel's government, while its status is disputed internationally. An important factual note for learners. The old city's sacred places lie within short walks of one another, and religious calendars set the rhythm of the year. Jerusalem's significance lies in this sustained overlap of worship and governance, across more than 5,000 years. On the Nile in Egypt, Cairo occupies the point where the river begins to fan into its delta. The early Islamic capital of Fustat was founded in 641 CE, just south of the present core, and a new royal city, Al-Qahira, Cairo, was established in 969 CE. Over the following centuries, Fatimid palaces, Mamluk mosques and madrasas, Ottoman complexes and 19th century boulevards merged into a single metropolis. The river remains the organizer. Bridges link islands and banks, embankments manage floods, and river traffic binds the capital to its long agricultural corridor. Cairo is the largest city in the Arab world by population, a scale reflected in its metro, markets and expanding districts on the desert plateau. As a capital, it shows how a great river can underpin more than 1,000 years of administrative life, while accommodating rapid modern growth. In Italy, Rome ties its record to a clear marker, the traditional founding date of 753 BCE, from city-state to republic to imperial centre, and, since 1871, the capital of a unified Italy. Rome demonstrates how statecraft and urban design can evolve together. 7 hills offered defensible sites. The Tiber provided water and trade. Roads and aqueducts projected power and sustained population. The unique fact sets Rome apart. It completely encloses another sovereign state within its municipal boundary. That neighbour is Vatican City, a reminder that Rome's influence grew not only from senators and soldiers, but also from the reach of a global church. The arrangement turns Rome into a host for 2 kinds of authority at once, national and spiritual. Vatican City, an independent city-state within Rome, is the smallest sovereign state and capital on Earth by both area and resident population. Its modern sovereignty dates to the Lateran Treaty of 1929, but the site's institutional history is much older. A 4th century basilica over a Roman necropolis, the papal residence re-established in 1377, and Renaissance building campaigns that created the great colonnades and palaces seen today. Despite covering less than 1 square kilometre and housing fewer than 1,000 residents, it maintains the full machinery of statehood, its own legal system, postal service, media and security, while hosting St. Peter's Basilica and museums of global importance. As a capital, Vatican City demonstrates that political weight can be measured by influence, heritage and institutional reach, rather than by acreage or headcount. Now to the places where the land chose the city, capitals whose latitude, height, wind or water fixed their fate long before any planner drew a line. In New Zealand, Wellington sits astride the Pinch of Cook Strait, a natural wind tunnel between 2 big islands. The roaring 40s sweep through this gap, turning a common breeze into a daily force, so much so that benches, railings and even plantings are picked with gusts in mind. The harbour is deep and well shielded by headlands, which is why ships and then ferries made it a natural hub, and why government followed. It also holds a quiet superlative. Among sovereign states, this is the southernmost capital, a city where brilliant scoured skies arrive one day, and white caps paint the bay the next. Across the North Atlantic, Iceland's Reykjavik sits near 64 degrees north, yet avoids the brutal winters you might expect. The reason is oceanic. The North Atlantic drift brings warmth that keeps temperatures remarkably moderate for the latitude. Geology lends a second gift. Hot water rises from the ground in this part of the world, so geothermal wells heat homes, pools, and even some sidewalks, turning the bedrock into public infrastructure. Light is the big seasonal swing. Long, leisurely days in summer, brief blue daylight in winter. So the city finds its rhythm in skylines of low sun and in neighbourhood pools that steam on chilly mornings. Among sovereign state capitals, Reykjavik is the northernmost and it wears that title lightly. On the Caspian shore, Azerbaijan's Baku is a capital that looks slightly up at its own sea. The city lies around 28 meters below global sea level, because the Caspian is a landlocked basin whose surface rises and falls with climate rather than tides. The Absheron Peninsula forms a wide natural harbour, while local winds, cool Khazri and warm Gilava, sweep along the boulevards with welcome regularity. Being below sea level is not just a curiosity, it shapes groundwater management, foundations and port engineering. Add nearby oil and gas fields, and you have a coastal capital whose layout and economy are written as much by geology as by history. High in the Andes, Bolivia's seat of government at La Paz occupies a steep-sided bowl carved into the edge of the Great Plateau. Central neighbourhoods perch around 3,600 metres, while the airport on the adjoining rim at El Alto sits above 4,000 metres. Thin air changes the everyday. Water boils sooner, football matches feel longer, and newcomers often take a day to find their breath. The terrain once made trips between rim and valley slow. Today, an extensive cable car network sails above cliffs and streets, linking workers, students, and officials in minutes. La Paz is de facto the capital because ministries and parliaments sit here, while Sucre holds the constitutional title, a useful reminder that political labels can be layered like the city's own streets. In Ecuador, Quito stretches along a narrow Andean bench under the flanks of the Pichincha volcano. It is one of the highest capitals near the equator, sitting at roughly 2,850 metres, which creates a climate many call perpetual spring. Cool days, crisp nights, and strong midday sun. Geography confines the city to a long, slender shape, so districts run along the valley and climb wherever a spur or terrace allows. The equatorial sun stands high, shadows at noon grow short, and ultraviolet light is strong enough that shade trees, arcades and hats are not style but strategy. Quito is where high altitude and zero latitude shake hands. On the Mongolian steppe, Ulaanbaatar holds the title of coldest capital by long-term average. Far from moderating seas, the climate is fiercely continental. Winters are long and severe, summers bright and brief, and the temperature can swing widely within a single year. The city sits in a valley, so temperature inversions in calm weather can trap cold air and smoke near the ground, making heating and air quality central parts of urban policy. District heating pipes, insulation, and sheltered routes are not afterthoughts, but the backbone of everyday life. When warmth returns, the hills green quickly and the riverbanks fill with walkers, a flash of softness after months of steel blue skies and frost. Now to borders, twins and proximity, the way a neat line on a map, a short stretch of water, or a shared river can turn neighbours into daily companions. Bratislava in Slovakia is the only national capital that meets two other countries right at its edge, brushing Austria on one side and Hungary on the other. The Danube and the Morava rivers frame the approach, and that geography makes international life feel ordinary. Cyclists roll to an Austrian cafe for lunch. Weekend markets draw shoppers from Hungarian towns, and freight glides along the same water corridor that has linked Central Europe for centuries. For a small capital, that position is a quiet superpower. Airports, rail lines and motorways radiate in three directions, and the city's riverfront feels less like a border and more like a hinge that swings open toward its neighbours. Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Brazzaville in the Republic of the Congo face each other across a single broad bend of the Congo River, the world's closest pair of opposing national capitals. The distance is a quick ferry ride, yet the river is powerful enough that a bridge has never been a simple matter. Even without one, the two cities share a daily conversation. radio and television spill over the water. Weather arrives the same way to both. Traders shuttle goods by boat, and cultural scenes borrow rhythms from each other's music halls. It is one urban landscape split by a living, muscular river, proof that water can divide two states and still knit a single city pair together. Roman Italy and Vatican City form the most intimate pairing of all, two sovereign capitals with an internal border that threads through streets and colonnades. A few paces can take a pedestrian from Italian jurisdiction to the world's smallest independent state, then back again in the time it takes to glance at a fountain. The line is marked by walls and by the embrace of St. Peter's Square, but in everyday terms the fabric is continuous. Same cobbles, same cafes, the same crowd flowing past. Rome has the unusual task of hosting a neighbour entirely inside its municipal limits, while Vatican City conducts global diplomacy from a footprint small enough to cross on foot in minutes. Doha in Qatar and Manama in Bahrain are Gulf capitals that grew up facing the same shallow sea, close enough for a short flight and long connected by traditional boat routes. Their histories rhyme: pearl fisheries first, then oil and gas, then finance and aviation. Ideas for a direct causeway have surfaced more than once, reflecting a geography that invites a link across calm waters. In practice, traffic moves by air and by sea, and both cities show how a maritime setting shapes a capital's habits. Harbours and airports first, ministries gathered within sight of the shoreline, and trade lanes that still run with the logic of tides and currents. Vienna in Austria sits only about 55 kilometres from Bratislava, and together they form a two-capital corridor along the Danube. Fast trains, riverboats and motorways make the hop feel more like a commuter trip than an international journey, while universities, science parks and cultural festivals treat the boundary as a seam to be stitched rather than a wall to be defended. The closeness pays off on both sides. Firms recruit across the pair. Visitors plan weekends that include two capitals, and the river's cycle paths turn the frontier into a leisurely ride. Few places in Europe turn proximity into such practical, everyday cooperation. Wellington in New Zealand is often counted among the most remote capitals from any other capital, its nearest peer being Canberra across the Tasman Sea. That distance changes priorities. Air links matter more than highways, undersea cables and satellites carry much of the conversation with the world, and the port takes on an outsized role for trade. Remoteness also brings a benefit, a compact self-contained capital where the harbour, hills and government precinct all sit within easy reach of one another. Without a neighbouring capital just down the road, the city sets its own rhythm tuned to wind, water and the clean line of its bay. Onto the island seats, capitals where land is scarce, water is close, and the sea quietly edits every urban decision. In the Maldives, Malé shows what a capital looks like when it grows on a low rim of coral. Space is so limited that the city builds upward and outward at once. Seawalls harden the shoreline, causeways stitch neighbouring islets together, and new districts rise on reclaimed lagoon. Streets are short, ferry routes act like extra avenues, and essential services sit within easy walking distance because there is nowhere to sprawl. Elevation is measured in modest steps, so drainage, coastal defences and careful land use are not extras, but the core of the city's operating plan. Malé turns scarcity into discipline. Compact blocks, mixed uses, and infrastructure that treats every metre of ground as precious. In Samoa, Apia faces the Pacific trades from a calm harbour on the north coast of Upolu, and its institutions lean into local tradition. The national parliament, the Fale Fono, echoes the open-sided Fale meeting house with a circular plan, broad overhanging roof and generous airflow. That shape is cultural and practical at once, shade for heat, openness for community, and a form instantly legible to Samoans. Ministries, markets and churches line the waterfront, while reefs just offshore blunt the waves. Verandas, high eaves and cross breezes are the city's quiet technologies, a reminder that architecture in the tropics begins with air and light. In Papua New Guinea, Port Moresby is a coastal capital that serves a nation whose people, trade and culture are strongly inland and highland. Set around the deep, sheltered water of Fairfax Harbour, the city acts as a switchboard between valleys and sea. Ministries on the headlands, the main airport for interprovincial travel, and docks where cargo moves to places that roads still reach only slowly. Traditional Motu and Koitabu villages once lined these coves, launching sail-powered trading voyages along the Gulf. The outlines of those bays still guide modern neighbourhoods. Port Moresby shows how a shoreline capital can manage a country whose daily life often runs along mountain spines. In the Solomon Islands, Honiara grew from a wartime logistics site into the national seat. During the Second World War, the airstrip at Henderson Field and the depots along Point Cruz cut a rough grid into the coast. After 1945, the administration shifted from Tulagi to this larger, more practical setting. The result is a layout that still carries its origins: straight runs between port, market and government, neighbourhoods climbing into green hills behind, and an airport that remains the city's anchor. Honiara is a clear example of how military infrastructure can set the bones for a post-war capital. In Tuvalu, Funafuti is an atoll capital where land and community share a very narrow stage. The main islet, Fongafal, is a slim strip with ocean on one side and lagoon on the other. The runway and the principal road sit along the same fragile ribbon. When flights are not scheduled, the airfield doubles as open space, sports ground and meeting place, because there is little spare land elsewhere. Freshwater depends on rain tanks and careful storage. Coastal protection is a blend of planting and walls, and almost every journey traces the same few lines of coral ground. On an atoll there is no inland, only two coasts and a thin seam of life. And Funafuti runs smoothly, because everyone understands exactly how limited that seam is. Fair point, let's give the rivers their due and keep the language alive. At the hinge between Egypt's Long Valley and the fan of its delta, Cairo grew in step with the Nile. Its early Islamic forerunner, Fustat, was founded in 641 CE, beside a protective bend, close enough to draw water, high enough to dodge the worst of the flood. Palaces and markets later shifted north into Fatimid Cairo, but the river stayed in charge. Bridges knit banks to islands, embankments disciplined the seasonal rise, and quays set the rhythm as sailboats gave way to steamers and then to evening ferries. Even as new districts climb the desert edge, Cairo remains a river capital at heart. Routes, markets and viewpoints, all arranged by that slow green curve. Where two different Niles meet, Sudan's Khartoum occupies one of geography's classic junctions. The Blue Nile, fast from the highlands, folds into the paler, slower White Nile around Tuti Island, and from that knot the metropolitan trio of Khartoum, Omdurman and Khartoum North spreads outward. Bridges radiate from the confluence like spokes, and the mixing of waters brings practical gifts: fertile banks, boat landings, and a natural rendezvous for caravans turned barges turned highways. Trade chose the site first, administration followed, and the city still reads like a lesson in why confluences become capitals. On a bluff with long views up two channels, Serbia's Belgrade guards the meeting of the Danube and the Sava. The fortress at Kalemegdan came before the modern city, planted where watchmen could see sails and rafts approach from either direction. Quays crept out from the cliff, parks softened the confluence, and railway yards later lined the flat ground where the rivers settle into one. Even as the city sprawls far beyond the old core, the geometry remains clear, a headland like the prow of a ship, one broad European river welcoming another. Baghdad in Iraq began as a bold diagram, a near-perfect round city founded in 762 CE, short way off the Tigris, and laced with canals to feed palaces, mosques, and barracks. That ideal circle loosened over time, and the capital stretched along the river's banks into a long linear metropolis linked by bridges and embankments. The logic never changed. In a hot, dry land, the Tigris remained the lifeline, bringing grain, timber, and people, cooling the air along its promenades, and turning the riverfront into the address every dynasty wanted. Along the Thames, England's capital learned to live with a river that breathes twice a day. Early London hugged firm foreshore near a reliable crossing, then grew wharves, warehouses, and shipyards into the bends. 19th century engineers straightened and raised long sections of bank, hiding deep new sewers below and setting promenades, roads, and rail above. Those embankments tamed floods, cleaned the water, and gifted the city the broad, walkable river edges that defined so many of its views. Bridges, stone, iron, and steel, finished the job by turning a barrier into a backbone. Paris treats its islands as stages. On the Seine, Ile de la Cité gathered palace, law courts, and cathedral within a short walk, letting state, justice, and worship share a single stone platform. Downstream, Ile Saint-Louis was laid out in the 17th century as an orderly residential quarter, straight streets and river facades answering the medieval tangle across the bridges. The channels focus views, slow traffic at crossings, and provide generous margins, quays, bookstalls, towpaths that give the capital its reflective edges. In Paris, the river does not just pass by, it frames the city's oldest scenes. Let's follow the tide to sea capitals, coastlines, estuaries, and harbours where saltwater quietly sets the rules. Tokyo, on Japan's broad Tokyo Bay, has spent generations nudging its shoreline outward. Mudflats became docks and rail yards, then whole neighbourhoods like Odaiba and Toyosu rose from reclaimed ground. The bay is the city's quiet engine. Container cranes feeding rail and road, short-hop ferries stitching quays together, and flood control gates standing by for typhoon season. Because the metropolitan area is the largest of any national capital. This seaward breathing space matters. It keeps freight moving, gives industry room to pivot, and lets a low-lying city live with the sea rather than merely beside it. Lisbon sits on Portugal's Tagus estuary, a wide, light-filled reach of river just shy of the Atlantic. Sandbars at the mouth once made pilots and tides essential, but the broad inner water has always given safe anchorage below Castle Heights. That geography explains the layered waterfront, arcaded customs houses, tiled warehouses, deep-water quays up and down the banks. Two great bridges stride the estuary, while a web of ferries takes care of everything in between. Lisbon is both shelter and springboard, a harbour to rest in, and a launch toward open ocean, exactly the balance that built an outward-looking capital. Athens breathes through Piraeus, the Greek port city that has partnered with the hilltop capital since antiquity. 3 snug basins gave classical fleets perfect shelter, Kantharos for heavy traffic, Zea and Munichia for warships, and the same layout drives today's rhythm. Cruise ships easing past repair yards, island ferries departing in steady waves, and a metro line pulling dockside life into the capital streets. Long ago, defensive walls stitched city to harbour. Now rails and highways do the same job. Stand at the quays and the lesson's obvious. The front door of modern Greece still opens onto water. Copenhagen, the Danish capital, treats its harbour as both workplace and living room. Low islands are sewn together with bridges. New districts cut canals into their plans, so blue slips between buildings. and the once industrial inner harbour now welcomes swimmers, kayaks, and museum steps that drop to the edge. The fixed link across Öresund folds Sweden into the daily map. Train to Malmö feels like an elongated tram, while water buses and bike lanes claim space where fences and cranes once stood. Clean, swimmable harbour water is the payoff from years of patient engineering, turning a working port into a city's favourite promenade without pushing ships away. Where Sweden's Lake Mälaren tips toward the brackish Baltic, Stockholm spreads over 14 islands laced with bridges and ferries. Fresh water slides east at the city's waist, and the locks at Slussen calm the level so central channels double as parks, bookstalls and cafe terraces. Neighbourhoods take their character from the shores they hug. Clifftop viewpoints on one island, palace fronts on another, green museum grounds on a third, and commuter boats make hops that roads would stretch into detours. Beyond the last tram stop, the archipelago begins in earnest. Thousands of skerries that make the capital feel like the front porch of the Baltic. Reykjavik sits on Iceland's Faxaflói Bay and draws comfort from the ground beneath it. Fishing quays and ferry slips line the coast, but the most important pipes carry heat rather than cargo. Geothermal water runs from nearby fields to radiators, public baths, and even select pavements where snow and ice quietly melt away. That foundation changes daily life in a northern maritime capital. Houses keep an even warmth, outdoor pools stay inviting in midwinter, and streets remain walkable when North Atlantic storms blow in. Ocean on the doorstep, warm rock underfoot, an efficient partnership written into the city's map. Now for the skies that set records. Capitals where wind, rain, heat, cold and ocean air write the headlines. Wellington, in New Zealand, earns its reputation as the windiest capital by average speed. Cook Strait funnels the roaring 40s straight through the city's harbour gap, while steep ridges act like bellows that accelerate gusts along streets and over saddles. The result is a place where handrails, hardy coastal trees and wind-tested building details are everyday design choices. Clear days bring long views to snowy ranges, blustery ones paint the bay with white caps. The wind is not a quirk, it is the climate's main instrument, tuning everything from ferry timetables to how public squares are oriented. Monrovia, on Liberia's Atlantic rim, ranks among the wettest capitals on Earth, taking around 4,600 millimetres of rain in a typical year. The West African monsoon drives months of heavy downpours, then eases back to gentler sea breezes. Broad eaves, verandas and covered walkways are practical architecture here, and drainage is a constant civic project as streets, markets and mangroves share the same lowlands. The payoff is a city washed in green, palms overhanging roadside stalls, breadfruit shading yards, and that familiar afternoon percussion of rain on tin. Lima, the Peruvian capital, sits in a coastal desert and is famously dry, one of the driest capitals anywhere, with only a few millimetres of rain in an average year. The cold Humboldt Current chills the air offshore, capping it with a marine layer that breeds long seasons of fog and drizzle known as grua rather than true rain. Rivers descending from the Andes, the Rimac, the Chillon and the Lurin, are the real water supply, channeled into reservoirs, treatment plants and irrigation. A city of muted sunlight and scarce rainfall learns to prize shade trees, fog-cooled mornings and careful water management. Kuwait City, in Kuwait, lives with some of the hottest capital city summers on the planet. For weeks at a time, daytime temperatures sit over 40 degrees Celsius, with heat waves that can push higher still and dusty shamal winds that occasionally sweep across the Gulf. Urban life adapts with deep shade, reflective roofs, extensive air conditioning, and a strong evening and night rhythm when pavements finally cool. The climate also shapes infrastructure choices, from district cooling systems to shaded transit stops, because survival comfort becomes basic design, not luxury. Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, shows how a cold latitude can feel gentler under the right ocean. The North Atlantic drift brings enough heat to soften winters, so average midwinter temperatures hover near freezing rather than plunging far below it, as they do in inland locations at similar latitudes. Maritime air keeps extremes in check. Storms may be frequent, but deep freezes are rare. The city's geothermal heating adds another layer of comfort, turning icy mornings into a stroll past steaming pools and warm pavements. Ocean warmth and hot rock together make a northern capital feel surprisingly mild. Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia stands at the other end of the spectrum, the coldest capital by long-term average. Far from moderating seas, the climate is sharply continental, long severe winters and short bright summers, with valley inversions that trap frigid air and, in still weather, smoke near the ground. Many households in Gyr areas have traditionally burned raw coal or wood for heat, which intensifies winter smog and turns air quality into both a planning and public health challenge. District heating networks, insulation upgrades, and cleaner fuels are the tools of change, all aimed at keeping people warm without filling the bowl of the city with haze when temperatures dive well below -20. Now to the capitals that plan with one eye on the horizon. Earthquakes, floods, fires, storms, and the sheer scale of growth shaping how a city is built and rebuilt. Tokyo in Japan and Mexico City in Mexico are mega capitals that treat earthquakes as part of daily planning. Tokyo's skyline hides a quiet toolkit, base-isolated towers, flexible frames, and neighborhood drills that rehearse evacuation the way some cities rehearse parades. Each September, the city marks disaster prevention with sirens and practice shelters, recalling the lessons of the 20th century and beyond. Mexico City faces a different challenge as well: soft former lake beds that can amplify shaking. Building codes toughened after major quakes in 1985 and again after 2017. Sirens tied to an early warning network give precious seconds, and schools and hospitals are rebuilt with ductility in mind. Two very different geologies, one shared habit of readiness. Jakarta in Indonesia wrestles with water from above and below. Monsoon rains push rivers out of their banks, while decades of groundwater pumping have helped some districts sink, inviting floodwater in on high tides. The city's response is layered: floodways and pump stations, seawalls and poldered neighborhoods, stricter rules on groundwater, and elevated roads across low-lying ground. A bigger move sits upstream of all that: a planned shift of the national capital to Nusantara in East Kalimantan, on the island of Borneo, easing the administrative load on a sinking crowded delta, while Jakarta keeps working as the country's commercial heart. Port-au-Prince in Haiti rebuilds in the shadow of major earthquakes. The Caribbean plate boundary threads past the country, and the 2010 catastrophe, followed by a severe quake in the southwest in 2021, set a hard agenda. Safer schools and clinics, stronger hillside construction to resist landslides, wider safe assembly spaces, and clearer routes for emergency traffic. Neighborhood plans now pay close attention to soil and slope. Masonry is tied and reinforced rather than stacked, and public buildings are modeled to sway without falling. Rebuilding takes time and steady resources, but each wave of repair pushes the capital toward a city that bends more and breaks less. Canberra in Australia lives on the bushland edge, so fire safety is written into the map. Suburbs meet reserves across managed buffer zones. Plantings are chosen for low fuel, and building standards address ember attack with toughened glazing, mesh screens, and careful roof detailing. After devastating fires in the early 2000s, evacuation routes were simplified, water points mapped, and green corridors maintained not only for wildlife but also as places where crews can work safely. It is a capital that treats summer as a design brief, using planning laws and landscape management to keep neighborhoods defensible when the wind turns hot and dry. Manila in the Philippines faces the West Pacific's long parade of typhoons and the storm surge that can ride into Manila Bay. The city's tools are varied: sea walls and raised roads along exposed frontages, pump stations on the low districts, and floodways that steer swollen rivers around the core. Early warning systems push alerts to phones, schools double as evacuation centres, and no-build strips along waterways are slowly widening to give rivers room to rise. In a place where rain can arrive by the bucket, resilience looks like concrete and community together, hardware to move water quickly, and neighbours who know which stairwell or gym becomes a shelter. Cairo in Egypt is building a new administrative capital out on the desert plateau east of the Nile corridor. The aim is practical: shift ministries and embassies out of the crowded historic basin, spread risk away from the river, and create room for modern utilities and transport that are hard to thread through medieval streets. Wide rights of way allow redundant power and water lines, new reservoirs sit on high ground, and public buildings are spaced to operate independently if one district is stressed. Cairo remains the cultural and economic giant on the river, while the new seat takes pressure off the old heart and adds a second centre of gravity for a fast-growing country. Not every capital is the country's biggest city. Some were selected for balance, geography, or symbolism rather than size. Canberra in Australia is the classic compromise. When rivalry simmered between Sydney and Melbourne, a new seat was mapped between them and designed as a garden city around a man-made lake. The result is a calm administrative hub with embassies tucked among bushland and axes aligned to surrounding hills. Sydney kept its role as the nation's largest city, but Canberra took the files, the parliament, and the diplomatic corps, proving that political centres need not be the loudest places on the map. Abuja in Nigeria replaced Lagos to reduce coastal congestion and to sit closer to the country's geographic middle. Built with wide avenues, distinct districts, and sightlines to Aso Rock, it was meant to feel neutral in a nation of many languages and regions. The move, formalised in 1991, spread government functions inland while Lagos continued as a powerhouse of trade and finance. Abuja's planned layout and centrality turned a vast country inward toward a common administrative point. Brasilia in Brazil was drawn on the High Cerrado and inaugurated in 1960 to open the interior and signal a modern future. Lucio Costa's Plano Piloto set ministries on a monumental axis and neighbourhood superquadras in green frames, while Oscar Niemeyer's civic buildings gave the capital its sculptural gleam. Far from coastal giants like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia reoriented attention to the nation's centre, showing how a purpose-built capital can reshape economic and political gravity. Ottawa, in Canada, mediates between English and French-speaking heartlands from a perch on the Ottawa River opposite Gatineau. Chosen in 1857, it linked Ontario and Quebec with a bilingual administrative core and a canal that still freezes into a winter skating route. Toronto grew larger, Montreal became a cultural magnet, yet Ottawa held the national institutions, Parliament Hill, the Supreme Court, the archives, serving as a bridge between the country's two major language communities. New Delhi, in India, sits inside the wider metropolis of Delhi as a planned imperial core that later became the Republican seat. Announced in 1911 and largely completed between 1912 and 1931, the plan set government along a grand east-west axis, with ministries in orderly precincts. Today it remains the administrative heart, while the surrounding city stretches far beyond it in size and population. Mumbai may be larger, but New Delhi is where the Union government conducts its daily work. Bern in Switzerland is officially the federal city, a practical way of saying capital without elevating one language region over another in a multilingual country. Curved by the Aar River and famous for arcaded streets, Bern hosts parliament and federal ministries, while Zurich, the financial centre, holds the population crown. The arrangement keeps national institutions in a compact, walkable setting and leaves the country's largest city free to focus on commerce and innovation. Some countries spread the work of a capital across more than one city, history, geography and politics each taking a share. South Africa is the famous three-city arrangement. Pretoria, within the city of Tshwane, carries the executive with the presidency and most ministries. Cape Town hosts the legislature in its stately parliament buildings, a long train ride and a cultural world away on the Atlantic. Bloemfontein rounds out the trio with the Supreme Court of Appeal, which is why it is traditionally called the judicial capital, even though the Constitutional Court now sits in Johannesburg. The split is deliberate, a balance between regions, climates and histories, stitched together by air routes and the parliamentary calendar. Bolivia divides title and daily business. Sucre holds the constitutional status of capital and the Supreme Court, a white-walled city in the high valleys. La Paz, higher still in a dramatic bowl of mountains, is where the seat of government actually works, presidency, parliament and ministries. The result is a civics lesson in two parts, one city for the letter of the law, another for the machinery of policy, both vital to the state's identity. The Netherlands keeps ceremony and administration in different places. Amsterdam is the capital by constitutional designation, the city of royal inaugurations and national memory. The Hague, some hours down the coast by bike or train, houses Parliament, the Prime Minister's office, the Supreme Court and the Council of State. Embassies cluster there too. For learners, the rule of thumb is simple: Amsterdam for the title, The Hague for the day-to-day running of the country. Malaysia offers a modern version of the split. Kuala Lumpur remains the capital and hosts Parliament, the National Palace, and major cultural institutions. Putrajaya, purpose-built to the south, is the administrative seat where most federal ministries and the Prime Minister's offices work behind lakes and landscaped boulevards. One city holds the ceremonial heart and legislature. The other is a campus-like engine room for paperwork, planning and policy. Tanzania shifted its centre on paper and then gradually in practice. Dodoma is the official capital in the country's interior, chosen to balance development away from the coast. For many years, however, ministries, embassies, and the daily bustle of government remained in Dar es Salaam, the big port on the Indian Ocean. Moves accelerated in recent decades, but the old commercial capital still carries much of the diplomatic and economic load while Dodoma grows into its role. Benin keeps its official capital in Porto Novo, a city of lagoons and Afro-Brazilian facades, while most government activity hums in Cotonou up the coast. The presidency and many ministries work from Cotonou, and most foreign embassies set up there as well, close to the country's busiest port and airport. Porto Novo holds the name and the National Assembly. Cotonou handles the daily business. Two cities, one state, each doing what their geography and history make easiest. Names change, capitals move, and sometimes a new seat of government appears almost overnight. Here are a few that redraw the map without redrawing the country. Astana in Kazakhstan has done a full loop on the letterhead. The steppe capital was renamed Nur Sultan in 2019 in honour of the outgoing president, then reverted to Astana in 2022 after a new wave of public and political discussion. Through the name changes, the purpose stayed the same. A centrally placed capital meant to balance a vast country, with winter-hardy architecture, wide avenues for snow and wind, and ministries spaced along a grand axis. Whatever the signboards say, the city remains a showcase for planned growth in a continental climate where minus temperatures and open horizons are the norm. Naypyidaw in Myanmar replaced Yangon with unusual speed in 2005. Government convoys moved north toward a new, purpose-built seat near Pinmana, chosen for its central location, available land, and the ease of laying out broad, secure boulevards. The design spreads ministries across generous plots, links them with multi-lane roads, and places Parliament on a prominent site, all served by a new airport and rail connections. Yangon continues as the country's biggest commercial hub, but the day-to-day machinery of national administration now runs from a city whose scale and spacing were set with future growth and seismic and security considerations in mind. Sri Jayawardenepura Kotte in Sri Lanka took over the formal role from Colombo, with Parliament moving in 1982 to an island in the Diawana Oya. The legislative complex sits low over the water, connected by causeways and surrounded by restored wetlands that double as ecological buffers. Colombo still handles much of the commerce, diplomacy and media, and many ministries remain there, but the constitutional heart beats in Kotte. The split suits the geography of the Western Province: heavy finance and port traffic on the coast, a calmer legislative campus inland where land could be shaped for a modern seat. Dodoma in Tanzania has been rising toward capital status since the 1970s, when the interior location was picked to balance development away from the coast. For decades, progress was steady but partial. Many state functions remained in Dar es Salaam. Momentum surged in the 2000s as ministries, parliament sessions and diplomatic footprints shifted inland. The plan is simple in idea and complex in execution. Move the administrative core to the country's middle, thread new highways and rail through the plateau, and let Dar es Salaam continue as the main port and business engine. One country, two complementary centres, one coastal and commercial, one central and governmental. Nyahulmud in Palau opened in 2006 as a fresh capital on Babeldaub Island, replacing the long-time seat at Koror. The new government complex stands in Melekeok State on a hill above the ocean, laid out with a capital, legislative chambers and court buildings in a compact campus. It is often described as the least populous national capital in the world, with no fixed residential base wrapped around the institutions themselves. That makes sense for an island nation spread across a wide Pacific expanse. Ministries work from the hill, while most daily life continues in the larger towns nearby. The move gave Palau a purpose-built seat without uprooting the communities that make the country tick. Capitals also teach lessons in how tightly cities can fit together, how fast they grow, and how their shapes follow ground, water, and policy. Manila, in the Philippines, is often ranked among the most densely populated capitals on Earth, with the city of Manila itself packing in over 40,000 people per square kilometre. The built form explains the figure. Narrow barangay streets, mixed-use shophouses, mid- and high-rise apartments threaded with jeepney routes and alleys where daily commerce never really stops. Metro Manila spreads across the Pasig Delta in a patchwork of cities, but the historic core remains astonishingly compact, with schools, markets, clinics and churches stacked within short walks. Density here is not only a statistic, it's a way of making a huge city work on human legs and short bus hops, even as planners wrestle with flood control and the need for more green, breathable space. Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, is another study in extreme compactness, growing along the embankments that tame the Buriganga, Turag, and Balu rivers. The delta's soft ground favours levees and polders, and new neighbourhoods often sprout on raised land that keeps monsoon water at bay. Within this hydraulic framework, the city builds upward. Concrete apartments above bustling ground floors, rickshaw-rich lanes feeding into arterials, elevated expressways flying over older grids. The result is a metropolis where population density rivals Manila's and where every transport improvement immediately fills with riders. Dhaka shows how a riverine capital expands by inches and stories, always negotiating with water. Tokyo, the capital of Japan, anchors the largest metropolitan population of any national capital, roughly 37 to over 40 million people, depending on how you draw the boundary. That size is manageable because the city is polycentric. Multiple downtowns, Shinjuku, Shibuya, Marunouchi, Ikebukuro, and more, each with its own skyline, rail hub, and web of streets. Private railways and subways do the heavy lifting, funneling commuters directly into these cores, while suburban lines end in terminal districts that double as shopping cities. Reclaimed waterfronts, new business quarters, and quietly efficient ring roads extend capacity without forcing everything through a single centre. Tokyo proves that scale can be civil if movement is by train first. Cairo in Egypt has evolved into a vast polycentric region by planting whole new cities on the desert edge. New Cairo to the east and 6th of October city, and Sheikh Zayed to the west add millions to the metropolitan total while taking pressure off the medieval lanes and 19th century boulevards along the Nile. These satellites come with universities, tech parks and housing districts of their own, linked back to the historic core by expressways and commuter buses. The pattern is deliberate. Give the capital room to breathe by creating several hearts instead of one. Greater Cairo today is less a single city than a necklace of urban centres strung around the river valley and plateau. Hanoi, in Vietnam, dramatically expanded its administrative area in 2008, absorbing Ha Tây province, My Linh district, and a slice of Hoa Binh. Overnight, the map shifted from a compact Red River city to a capital with wide rural belts, craft villages, and new town sites folded inside its boundary. The change allowed space for ring roads, high-tech parks, and reservoirs, while the historic heart, Hoan Kiem, the Old Quarter and the French Quarter, kept its intimate scale. Lakes and dikes still organise everyday life, but the jurisdiction now includes farmland and mountains as well as boulevards, making Hanoi a rare mix of dense urban fabric and open countryside under one city hall. Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, grew from a walled oasis with mud brick lanes into a multi-ring megacity within 2 generations. Oil wealth, state planning, and vast tract of flat desert produced a grid of wide arterials, successive ring roads, and neighbourhoods that once assumed car travel as the default. The skyline rose with ministries, business parks, and landmark towers, and the urban footprint pushed outward in every direction. A new metro network now threads through this spread-out form, and older districts are being retrofitted with shade, trees, and pedestrian routes. Riyadh's trajectory is a textbook of rapid modernisation, from fortress town to continent-scale capital city in the span of a lifetime. Everyday culture in the seat of power often hides in plain sight, and Mexico City in Mexico proves it at Xochimilco. Here, a lattice of canals preserves a fragment of the old lake world that once covered the Valley of Mexico. The so-called floating gardens are not actually floating, they are chinampas, careful rectangles built from layered reeds and lake mud, anchored by water-loving ahuejote willows. Flat-bottomed trajineras carry families and produce past herons and reed beds, while community farmers still raise flowers, greens and herbs on plots that act like living sponges. The canals are also home to the critically endangered axolotl, a reminder that urban nature can be rare and precious. For a mega-city that long ago drained most of its lakes, Xochimilco offers continuity, a working memory of water management, market gardening and boat life, set against a skyline of modernity. It is culture, ecology, and food supply woven together, one slow channel at a time. Bangkok in Thailand threads two very different networks through the same monsoon landscape, klongs at water level and sky trains overhead. The city sits on the Chao Phraya floodplain, so canals have always done triple duty: transport, drainage and daily commerce, with commuter boats still zipping along Klong San Sep and long tails ferrying shoppers to waterside markets. Houses step back on stilts or raised plinths, temples face the water with piers, and neighbourhoods treat the canal bank as a front street. Above all this, the BTS SkyTrain and the MRT knit districts together with air-conditioned certainty when rains turn traffic slow, while river ferries link the rail lines to historic piers. The result is a capital that meets the monsoon with options: glide, ride, or walk the boardwalk, and let the city's rhythm adjust to the season without ever stopping. Brasilia in Brazil was drawn as a manifesto in plan and concrete. Lucio Costa's Plano Piloto sketches an airplane silhouette across the Cerrado, a monumental fuselage for government and sweeping wings of everyday life. Oscar Niemeyer's civic buildings, cathedral, ministries, the Itamaraty Palace, stand along the central axis like a catalogue of modern curves and shadows, while the Super Quadra housing blocks tuck schools, shops and playgrounds into green courtyards so that daily errands happen on foot. Inaugurated in 1960, the inland site pulled attention away from the Atlantic Rim and toward the nation's centre. High, dry plateau weather shaped the details: shade under pilotis, broad verges and long sight lines that let wind move. Brasilia is purpose-built down to its street grain, fast on the axes, human-scaled inside the superblocks. Planning turned into a capital city. Canberra in Australia takes the garden city idea and stitches it to a landscape of ridges, gullies, and a long reflective lake. Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney Griffin mapped a pair of major axes, one aligned to Mount Ainslie and Parliament House, the other to water, so ceremony is literally drawn into the ground. Lake Burley Griffin, completed in the 1960s, acts as the hinge. Museums and national institutions on generous lawns, embassies tucked among eucalypts, and neighbourhoods that step outward into bushland. Roundabouts and boulevards keep traffic measured, while bike paths and lakeside walks make the capital feel unhurried. Canberra is a compromise site that became a composed place, a civic stage set in a park where topography, trees and geometry share the job of making government feel open and legible. Abuja in Nigeria rose on the savannah to calm rivalries and pull the administrative heart toward the country's middle. The master plan set ring roads and district spines around the granite presence of Aso Rock, placing the National Assembly, the presidential complex and ministries in a central area while residential sectors radiate outward. Heat and seasonally heavy rains shape the design choices: broad rights of way for air and shade, setbacks for water, and wide boulevards that keep government campuses accessible. Officially adopted as capital in 1991, Abuja let coastal Lagos remain the commercial powerhouse, while a neutral, centrally located seat handled national politics. The result is planning as nation-building, a city drawn to balance geography, identity, and climate in one move. Islamabad in Pakistan was laid out by Konstantinos Doxiadis as a series of cool, gridded sectors beneath the Meghalaya hills. Each sector blends housing, schools, markets, and parks, separated by green belts that work like lungs and fire breaks. The commercial blue area runs as a spine. Rawal Lake supplies water and breezes, and the nearby hills form a national park at the city's shoulder. Orientation and elevation matter here. Streets catch valley winds, tree-lined avenues keep pavements bearable in summer, and building codes bake shade into the public realm. The design is not just tidy, it is climate-minded, scaling from the monumental Faisal Mosque to neighbourhood markets without losing the sense that the hills are always in the frame. Putrajaya in Malaysia shifts the machinery of government to a lakeside city purpose-built for administration. Planned in the 1990s, it gathers ministries along landscape boulevards and folds them around an artificial lake that moderates heat and frames vistas. Bridges arch with distinct silhouettes, the Putra Mosque anchors a waterside square, and the Prime Minister's offices crown a gentle rise. Fibre, district cooling, and broad pedestrian routes make the campus feel contemporary, while Kuala Lumpur, still the national capital, keeps the crown of commerce, culture, and many ceremonial roles. Putrajaya is the engine room, a quieter city whose layout lets large agencies work side by side without the friction of a dense historic core. Naypyidaw in Myanmar arrived with striking speed in 2005, moving the seat of government from Yangon to a spacious site near Pinmana. Ministries sit in widely spaced precincts connected by very broad boulevards. The parliamentary complex rises on a commanding plot, and a new airport and rail line serve a city drawn at a continental scale. The spacing speaks to logistics and security as much as symbolism, giving convoys room and separating critical services. Monsoon rains, tropical sun, and seismic risk all left their marks on the grid and the building standards. It is a statement in layout as much as law, the state made visible through distance, width, and a landscape measured in long, straight lines. Axes, vistas, and symbolism, some capitals make their messages legible in the very lines of their streets. In the United States, Washington, D.C. follows Pierre L'Enfant's late 18th century idea of radiating avenues laid over a calm grid. State-named diagonals cross at circles and squares, sight lines stitch the Capitol to the Washington Monument and onward to the Lincoln Memorial, and Pennsylvania Avenue draws a ceremonial thread between legislature and presidency. These alignments are not just pretty views. They script parades, protests, and national rituals, turning geometry into a stage where the Republic shows and examines itself. France's Paris recast its core in the 19th century under Baron Haussmann, who cut broad boulevards through medieval knots and tied them to parks at the city's edges. Long, straight vistas, think of avenues converging on the Arc de Triomphe, gave troops clear routes and citizens spacious promenades, while uniform facades and generous sewers made order literal as well as symbolic. The result is a capital where power reads as perspective, wide streets that promise light, air, and visibility, and that also make the state's hand unmistakable in stone. On the North China Plain, Beijing holds to a rigorous north-south imperial axis. Ancient gates once mark the southern approach. The Forbidden City sits on the line like a jewelled hinge. Jingshan's Hill, the Drum and Bell Towers, and modern extensions toward the Olympic Green echo the same spine. The alignment embodies more than neat planning. It is cosmology translated into urban form, yoking cardinal directions, hierarchy and governance into one straight path through the heart of China's capital. India's New Delhi set its great east-west boulevard to run from the hilltop home of the head of state down to the War Memorial at India Gate. Long known as Rajpath and renamed Kartavya Path in 2022, this axis gathers ministries on measured lawns, intersects a perpendicular route at generous circles, and frames processions with domes and colonnades. The plan, drawn in the early 20th century, later became the stage for a democratic republic. The same geometry now hosts parades, protests, and quiet evening walks under rows of trees. Turkey's Ankara remade itself from a citadel town into a republican capital after 1923. New ministries lined up along Ataturk Boulevard. Modern quarters like Kızılay spread from carefully drawn junctions, and Anıtkabir, the hilltop mausoleum of Ataturk, anchors the skyline with axial approaches that read from miles away. The architecture leans toward clarity and mass rather than ornament, signalling a western-facing modern state in the very proportions of its streets and squares. Morocco's Rabat frames the Casbah of the Udayas and the old Medina with an orderly administrative city planned during the Protectorate era. Tree-lined boulevards, the Royal Palace precinct, ministries and embassies sit on measured axes that answer the Atlantic Light and the Bouregreg River. Here the symbolism is in adjacency, historic walls and blue and white alleys within a short walk of planned power, the traditional city and the paperwork city looking at one another across gardens and broad straight streets. Moving a capital is never just a change of address. It's a decision about where a country wants its centre of gravity to be. In Tanzania, Dodoma moved from idea to everyday reality over several decades. The plan dates back to the 1970s, when leaders chose an inland site to balance development away from the Indian Ocean coast. For years, ministries remained in Dar es Salaam, while parliament sessions and some agencies tested the waters in the interior. The pace quickened in the 2010s as whole departments, diplomatic compounds and university branches shifted to the plateau. Dodoma's appeal is practical. Land for wide government precincts, room for new utilities laid in straight lines, and a position closer to the population's midpoint than a far coast metropolis. Dar es Salaam keeps the big port and the commercial surge. Dodoma now carries the paperwork and the parliamentary calendar. Kazakhstan's move from Almaty to Astana in the late 1990s put the capital on the open steppe, closer to the country's geographic centre and major transport corridors. The climate is famously severe, with long, sharp winters that shape the architecture, deep foundations, sheltered entries, and insulated, wind-aware street canyons. An internationally led master plan produced a bold skyline, the Beitaruk Tower's emblem, tent-like leisure halls, and the presidential palace on an axial stage. The message is both logistical and symbolic. A northern central capital ties distant regions together and signals a forward-looking state, comfortable building at continental scale. Côte d'Ivoire split prestige and practicality when the official capital moved from Abidjan to Yamoussoukro in 1983. Yamoussoukro sits inland on broad avenues with land to spare, government campuses spaced out, and landmark structures such as the vast basilica, making the point that national symbolism belongs to more than the coast. Abidjan, meanwhile, kept the economic engine. Deepwater port, bourse, media, and most corporate headquarters. In practice, many ministries and diplomatic missions have long retained a strong presence in Abidjan for convenience, while Yamoussoukro holds the constitutional title and signature institutions. One country, two focal points, each doing the job its geography makes easiest. Brazil's shift from Rio de Janeiro to Brasilia in 1960 was interior development turned into map work. By planting the capital on the High Planalto, the government drew roads, telecommunications and attention into the country's middle, reducing the old over-reliance on Atlantic ports. The new federal district gave federal agencies space to grow without jostling a historic port city, while Rio continued as a cultural capital and major tourism gateway. Brasilia's planned axes and superblocks were the hardware. The software was the promise that the nation's future would be inland as well as along the coast. That promise helped populate the vast Cerrado with universities, research centres and new towns radiating from the capital. Nigeria's move from Lagos to Abuja aligned symbol and logistics. The decision, taken in the 1970s and realised in 1991, pulled the seat of government toward the country's geographic middle and away from coastal congestion. Abuja's site, surrounded by hills and anchored by the granite bulk of Asa Rock, allowed a master plan of ring roads, green belts, and clearly zoned districts. A centrally located capital is easier for far-flung states to reach, and it feels politically neutral in a country of many languages and faiths. Lagos, freed from hosting the federal machine, doubled down on what it does best: trade, industry and culture on the edge of the Atlantic. Pakistan echoed the same logic by shifting from Karachi to Islamabad in the 1960s. Karachi remained the commercial giant on the Arabian Sea, but the administrative heart moved north to a cooler, more central site beneath the Meghalaya hills. Rawalpindi served as a temporary seat while the new capital's gridded sectors, green belts and civic spine took shape. Climate played a part, summer heat tempered by altitude and breezes, and so did strategy, with a location closer to the country's northern corridors. Today, Islamabad's planned form and federal complexes complement Karachi's ports and markets, a two-city arrangement that divides the national workload according to terrain and task. Some districts double as textbooks. Walk them and you learn how a country thinks about power, memory and public life. Berlin's rebuilt government quarter shows how architecture can mend a line that once split a city. Along the Spree, the ribbon of the Federation pulls together the Reichstag, the Chancellery, and the long parliamentary offices, with footbridges stepping over the water where the border and the Berlin Wall once ran. The Reichstag's glass dome turns light and views into a lesson about transparency. Paths thread across lawns that used to be no man's land, and cyclists glide a route that once required passports and suspicion. Germany put its most symbolic buildings precisely where the scar was deepest, so that every committee meeting and school group tour crosses in some small way the old divide. On the high bluff above the Ottawa River, Canada's Parliament Hill sits like a compass point for national memory. Around it, the city lines up places that store the country's past in public view. Library and Archives, Canada on Wellington Street, the National Gallery across the Alexandra Bridge with a sightline to the Peace Tower, and the Canadian Museum of History just over the water in Gatineau. The Rideau Canal's flight of locks meets the river below, a 19th century engineering feat that still sets the rhythm of the seasons when it freezes for skating. The idea is simple and generous. Keep the paperwork of a democracy within a short walk of the shelves, paintings and artifacts that explain who the laws are for. Mexico City stretches culture and memory along Paseo de la Reforma, a boulevard first laid out in the 19th century to link Chapultepec Castle with the city centre. What began as an imperial gesture has been thoroughly naturalised by a republic. Rotundas carry statues of reformers, the Angel of Independence rises over traffic circles, and museums, embassies, and towers alternate with trees and benches. On many Sundays, the avenue hands itself to bikes and walkers, turning a traffic artery into a civic living room. Protests, parades, marathons and celebrations all choose this line through the capital. Proof that an elegant road can also be the place where a city does its thinking out loud. South of the historic heart, Italy's capital built Euro as a showcase district with a very specific message in stone. Planned for a world fair that never came, its rationalist geometry, broad boulevards, arcades, colonnades, survived the war and later found new uses as offices, museums and fairgrounds. The Palazzo della Civita Italiana, nicknamed the Square Colosseum, reads like a marble thought experiment about Rome's past and future at once. Today, venues like the Nuvola Convention Centre add contemporary curves to the older grid. Rome's lesson here is clear. Even architecture born of propaganda can be recycled into a working city, the grand axes repurposed for commerce, culture and everyday commutes. Budapest sets out its 19th century pride in a straight line you can follow with your feet. From Heroes' Square, with its arching colonnades and statues of state founders, Andrassy Avenue runs toward the centre under rows of trees and handsome facades. The Hungarian State Opera House anchors the route, and beneath the paving stones glides the Millennium Underground, opened in 1896 as one of Europe's earliest metro lines. Squares punctuate the journey, cafes and bookshops soften the edges, and the whole axis ties City Park to the inner city in a way that makes ceremony feel like part of daily life. Hungary's capital keeps its civics lesson outdoors, written in boulevards, stations and stone. London in the United Kingdom put rapid transit underground before anyone else, opening the Metropolitan Railway in 1863 and then teaching the world how to read it with Harry Beck's simplified diagram in 1933. The tube map ignores geography in favour of clarity, straight lines, clean angles and equalised station spacing, an approach that inspired countless systems after it. Circle and cut and cover lines knit together with deep level tubes, interchanges assigned with the familiar roundel, and service frequency is the real magic trick. Trains arriving every few minutes turn a vast city into a series of short, certain steps. What began as steam under Victorian streets became a design language and a habit of mind: point, change, arrive. Paris in France runs on two tempos that share the same score. The metro, opened in 1900, is dense and local, with stations strung like beads every few blocks and rubber-tired lines that climb grades with ease. The RER, born in the late 20th century, blasts across the region, threading long tunnels under the centre and leaping to far suburbs in a handful of stops. Châtelet-le-Halles sits at the knot, where fast and frequent meet. Together they let Parisians live a short hop life inside the city, and a long stride life across Ile-de-France, all on one coherent map. Moscow in Russia turned many of its stations into civic palaces, opening in 1935 with marble halls, mosaics, chandeliers, and heroic sculptures that made everyday travel feel ceremonial. Deep platforms doubled as wartime shelters. Vaults and pylons carry art that moves from socialist realism to sleek contemporary design as the network expands. Trains run at tight headways, counted in seconds at peaks, and recent additions like the Moscow Central Circle and the Big Circle Line fold suburban flows into the metro web. Tap a single card, descend into stone and light, and discover a railway that treats beauty as part of the service. Tokyo in Japan choreographs multiple rail companies as if they were one orchestra. Japan Railways and a constellation of private railways and subways exchange trains through shared tunnels, so a commuter can board far out on a suburban line and ride directly into a downtown metro corridor without changing. Punctuality is legendary. Delays measured in seconds, and platforms are tuned for flow, with doors that meet marked queuing lines, staff guiding peak crowds, and information displays that leave little to guesswork. With so many downtowns, Shinjuku, Shibuya, Marunouchi, Ikebukuro, the system moves millions by distributing them minute by minute to the right place rather than forcing everyone through a single core. Delhi in India built a modern air-conditioned metro at remarkable speed, opening its first corridor in 2002 and expanding in waves that now cover the city and spill into satellite towns. Broad, bright stations, women-only coaches and platform screen doors on busy lines make travel calmer and safer in fierce summers and dusty winters. Advanced signalling, including fully automated operation on some stretches, keeps trains humming at short intervals. Park and ride lots, feeder buses and integrated smart cards stitch the system into daily life, turning daunting commutes into predictable, cool journeys across a megacity. Cairo in Egypt runs the pioneer metro of Africa and the Arab world, with Line 1 opening in 1987 by linking and upgrading old suburban railways into a true subway spine. Subsequent lines dove under the Nile. Line 2 made the first river crossing, so that neighbourhoods on both banks share the same frequent service. Women-only cars, long platforms and air-conditioned trains tackle heat and crowding, while the expanding Line 3 and new monorail links promise easier access to growing districts and the new administrative capital on the desert plateau. In a city shaped by a great river, the metro gives a second current, fast, regular, and indifferent to traffic above. Some capitals, and a few instructive neighbours, prove that not every journey needs a subway. Rails can be small, boats can be fast, and a cable can do what a road cannot. Lisbon in Portugal keeps its bright yellow electricos rattling up grades that would make a gearbox sweat. Routes like the celebrated 28th thread between tiled facades squeeze past balconies and crest hills where modern buses still grunt. The cars themselves are living hardware. Wood trim interiors, brass fittings, a bell that announces each bend. Narrow gauge and nimble trucks let them pivot through Alfama and Grassa, while magnetic track brakes tame sudden slopes. They are not just nostalgia pieces. Residents use them for everyday errands, sharing space with visitors who climb aboard for the view. A century of continuous service has turned these trams into moving landmarks, heritage that still earns its keep by going exactly where steep streets demand. Athens in Greece hides a museum beneath your feet. When the metro expanded in the 1990s and early 2000s, construction sliced through layers of antiquity, and the city made a choice: display what was found. At Syntagma Station, glass cases hold ancient graves and pottery within sight of escalators. At Monastiraki, tracks run beside exposed foundations. At Acropolis, showcases explain the water systems that kept the hill alive. Wayfinding doubles as education, with clear labels in Greek and English turning a transfer into a quick lesson. The effect is disarming and practical at once. You catch your train, and you also meet the city's earlier versions without ever leaving the concourse. Istanbul in Turkey, though not the capital, offers Ankara a useful lesson from the water. Ferries cross the Bosphorus and the Golden Horn on tight headways, often beating bridge traffic while passengers sip tea and watch Europe and Asia slide by. Modern catamarans share the schedule with classic white vapeur boats. The Istanbul cart swipe makes the whole fleet feel like an extension of the metro. Because the city grew along straits and inlets, a marine network is not a nicety but a backbone. It shows how a government seat such as Ankara, hemmed by hills and highways, can look to its own lakes and streams for complementary routes when streets clog and rails need relief. Wellington in New Zealand reads its harbour like a timetable. The East by West ferry jumps the water in minutes, sparing a long drive around the bays. The century-old cable car lifts commuters from Lambton Quay to Kelburn without fuss, and the bus network plans for gusts with shelters and stop placement that respect the city's famous wind. Footpaths splice uphill suburbs with zigzags and steps, turning steep terrain into walkable shortcuts. The trick is not size but fit. Modes chosen for a compact bowl where a ridge, a cove or a headwind can matter more than raw distance. As a package, ferries, a funicular, and wind-savvy buses let a small capital punch above its weight. La Paz and El Alto in Bolivia bridge altitude with an everyday skyway. Mi Teleférico, launched in 2014 and grown line by line, strings gondolas from the high plateau down into the canyon and back again, bypassing serpentine roads and traffic jams. Stations plug into bus corridors and market districts. Cabins arrive every few seconds, and fares stay low enough that students, vendors and office workers share the same moving view. The system connects a constitutional capital's partner city on the rim with the de facto seat of government below, making a sprawling vertical metropolis feel stitched together. In a place where oxygen thins, the cable car is an egalitarian metro that floats. Tbilisi in Georgia has rediscovered simple tools for a steep setting. The funicular to MTAT's Minder Park, rebuilt and reopened after a long pause, whisks people from the city's shoulder to a breezy ridge in minutes, trading hairpin roads for a straight climb. Newer cableways link Reich Park to the Narracalla Fortress and run up to Turtle Lake, plugging gaps where buses would struggle and footpaths would take too long. These lines are short, frequent and scenic. More importantly, they solve a hard geometry problem that every hillside capital knows. The fastest way up is often a line in the air. Some streets remember what came before them, and Vienna in Austria offers a perfect example. The Ringstrasse traces the line where medieval walls once stood, a 19th century decision to swap fortifications for a showpiece boulevard. Along the curve came the great institutions of a modern capital: opera, parliament, university, museums, each set back with lawns and trees as if to prove the city no longer feared siege. The Ring is not just a road, it is a civics lesson in stone, mapping the passage from defence to display, from keeping people out to inviting them in. Trams glide where cannons once aimed, and every facade seems to say the same thing. A confident city can turn its boundary into its living room. Madrid in Spain carved Gran Via straight through a dense tangle of streets, a diagonal that took decades to plan and build. Opened in phases from the early 1900s, it linked Calle de Alcalá to Plaza de España and created a stage for ambitious architecture: department stores, cinemas, and early skyscrapers like the Telefonica building. At first, the cut felt shocking. Whole blocks were expropriated, corners squared, and vistas forced into being. Then the city adopted it. Today, Gran Via reads as a love letter to modernity, full of neon, theatres, rooftop terraces, and a steady river of pedestrians who treat the once controversial incision as Madrid's favourite promenade. Bucharest in Romania wears two urban grains at once. The older core is a web of narrow lanes and courtyards. Over it, the socialist period laid broad, straight boulevards and a monumental civic centre after the 1977 earthquake. Boulevardul Unirii marches toward the Palace of the Parliament with symmetry and scale, while just a turn or two away the streets shrink to cafe corners, churches behind walls, and 19th century houses with wrought iron balconies. The juxtaposition is not subtle, but it is instructive. One city planned as a showcase of state power, laid across another grown by merchants and monasteries. Walk a few minutes, and you switch eras without changing capitals. Hanoi in Vietnam sets two maps side by side. The old quarter north of Hoan Kiem Lake is a dense lattice of guild streets, many still named for the trades that once dominated: silk, tinsmiths, herb sellers, each front house stretching back to a long narrow courtyard. A short stroll away the French laid out wide shaded boulevards and formal squares, with villas and public buildings arranged to catch breezes off the Red River. The result is a city that reads like a bilingual text, one page in compact market-minded script, the other in broad colonial penmanship. Both are active at once, so a morning errand can pass from scooter-packed alleys to plane tree avenues in the time it takes a traffic light to change. Kathmandu in Nepal threads courtyards and alley shrines into a walkable maze that predates cars by centuries. Newer neighbourhoods link Bahal courtyards, shared spaces edged by homes and small monasteries, with narrow galley lanes, while stone spouts or hitis tuck into corners where people once drew water. The fabric is practical and devotional at the same time. Tiny temples at junctions, prayer wheels by doorways, rest houses where traders once paused. Pilgrim routes still double as shortcuts, stepping from square to square under carved eaves. In a city of earthquakes and monsoons, these small spaces also act as spillovers and meeting points, proof that an old street plan can still solve modern needs. Thimphu in Bhutan famously runs without traffic lights. The capital tried them once and decided a uniformed officer in a kiosk, graceful hand signals and all, fit the pace of the place better. Roundabouts, human-scaled crossings, and a steady respect for pedestrians do much of the work that signals would do elsewhere. The choice reflects more than charm. It shows a planning philosophy that puts people and clarity first on streets where volumes are modest and scenery, zong, hills, prayer flags, demands unhurried eyes. In Thimphu, road order feels like a conversation, not a command. Cold, heat, and clever routing. Some capitals build the weather right into the map. Helsinki in Finland treats winter as an invitation to go downstairs. The city has an extensive network of underground concourses, passages, car parks, sports halls, and civil defence shelters carved into granite. Many of them link directly to the central railway station and metro stops. Asemäteneli and the Campi complex let people cross busy streets, change lines, or run errands without facing sleet or icy winds, and wayfinding gently steers walkers toward the warm route when the mercury drops. Rock-hewn spaces double up. In peacetime they host hockey rinks or swimming pools. In an emergency they can shelter thousands. Add reliable metro frequencies, covered tram stops, and good snow clearance, and you get a capital where the default winter journey is dry-shod, quick, and surprisingly pleasant. Oslo in Norway flipped its waterfront by sending major traffic under the fjordside and giving the surface back to people. Highway lanes that once hugged the quays now dive into tunnels, and the Fjord City makeover stretches a continuous promenade past the Opera House, the New Munch Museum, libraries, housing, and pocket beaches. Ferries and island boats still come and go, but cars no longer dominate the view. Cyclists and strollers do. Parks knit across former slipways. Timber piers host saunas and cafes, and steps run straight into the water where guardrails used to be. The move is simple to describe and profound in effect. Bury the road, raise a city. Riyadh in Saudi Arabia answers desert distances with a vast air-conditioned metro and a redesigned bus network. The six-line system threads through business districts and new suburbs, linking park-and-ride hubs to cooled platforms and shaded concourses. Architect-designed landmark stations like the branching dune-inspired hub at the King Abdullah Financial District double as civic spaces, while canopies, screens, and generous setbacks tame glare and wind-blown dust. Buses knit between stations on dedicated lanes, and the whole package aims to replace long hot car trips with predictable climate-controlled rides. In a city built at continental scale, shade and chilled air become mobility tools as important as rails. Doha in Qatar takes microclimate seriously, starting at the station door. Entrances to the three-line metro are cast as tall, sail-like canopies that shade queues and catch breezes. Inside, mezzanines and platforms stay cool even when summer pushes the thermometer hard. The big interchange at Mishreb is stitched to surrounding blocks by arcades and narrow shaded sikas, so the last few hundred meters can be walked in comfort. District cooling plants do heavy lifting in the background, while palm-lined promenades and cooled bus shelters extend the network at street level. The result is a system where the hardest part of a journey, the first and last minutes outdoors, is designed with the sun in mind. Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia ties transport planning to warmth. The capital sits in a cold basin, so reliable movement in winter depends on two things: keeping vehicles running and keeping people out of the wind. Bus priority on key corridors, especially along Peace Avenue, helps fleets maintain headways when snow narrows lanes, while enclosed or semi-enclosed shelters and underground crossings give riders a break from minus temperatures. The city's centralised district heating network, fed by combined heat and power plants, runs along the same main arteries, and that co-location simplifies maintenance and keeps depots, hospitals, and dense housing close to dependable heat. Trials with cleaner fuels and newer buses tackle the air quality side of winter, making the daily ride not just faster, but easier to breathe. Wild edges can sit right beside city hearts, and Nairobi in Kenya makes the point in the boldest way. Nairobi National Park begins where offices and highways end, a grassland and acacia world held up against the capital's skyline. Lions, rhinos and giraffes move through a protected landscape that is within minutes of government buildings and housing estates, and aircraft on approach sometimes cast shadows over zebras. The arrangement forces a daily conversation about fences, corridors and coexistence. Livestock and commuters on one side, migratory routes on the other. Yet the benefit is huge. A capital where the idea of a national park is not a distant holiday, but part of the view from a boardroom window. Stockholm in Sweden is widely recognised as the first national urban park, a continuous band of oak woods, palace grounds, museums and waterfronts that sweeps from the royal island of Djurgården through Haga and Ulriksdal. It sits squarely inside the metro map, so a morning commute can include roe deer under ancient trees or a shoreline walk beside boat clubs. The park keeps historic landscapes intact, alleys, meadows and royal pavilions, while also absorbing modern uses like concert venues and research campuses. It proves that a capital can protect biodiversity and heritage without pushing them to the edge. The green structure and the cultural life are designed to fit together. Oslo in Norway lets its marker forest press right up to the city edge, with the legal marker boundary protecting the woods that ring the capital. Trams and metro lines lift residents to trailheads in a handful of stops. Holmenkollen, Sognsvann, and Frognerseteren are household names because they are both stations and gateways. In winter, lit ski tracks fan out under spruce. In summer, lakes become swimming spots and gravel paths meander for hours. The tradition of Allemansretten, the right to roam, turns this access into a civic right rather than a luxury. School groups, club runners, and families all treat the forest as an extension of the living room. Oslo's urban form is shaped by that promise. Dense neighbourhoods, then woods you can enter with a day pack. Canberra in Australia plans its suburbs around bushland corridors that read as both beauty and safety. Wildlife moves along creek lines and ridges. Cyclists and walkers follow the same threads, and the spaces also act as fuel breaks when summer turns hot and dry. After severe fires in the early 2000s, setbacks, ember-resistant building details, and managed green buffers became standard practice, so homes meet reserves with eyes open to risk. Kangaroos on playing fields at dusk are a normal sight, and kookaburras laugh from eucalypts along shared paths. The idea is straightforward. Keep nature close, but design the edges so people and bush can share a boundary without fear. Islamabad in Pakistan keeps the Meghalaya Hills at its doorstep, and that proximity sets the tone for the entire capital. A national park climbs from the city's northern edge to the higher ridges of the Himalayan foothills. Trailheads like 3, 5 and 7 begin just minutes from ministries in the blue area. The Faisal Mosque sits at the foot of the slopes, a landmark that makes the hills feel present from almost any street. Monkeys haunt picnic spots, leopards roam the higher forest, and cool evening air slides down gullies into the gridded sectors below. Islamabad's plan uses that geography, green belts, view corridors, and water catchments to keep the city oriented to the hills rather than turning its back on them. Wellington in New Zealand wraps itself with a town belt and an outer green belt that holds steep ridges clear of development. Tracks crisscross the spines, mountain bikes and runners move between gullies, and the fenced sanctuary at Zealandia has helped tuakaka and other native birds spill back into inner suburbs. The belts are old promises kept, reserves set aside early, so houses would not swallow every hillside in a compact, windy bowl. Because the land stays open, the capital has view lines in every direction. Harbour, headlands, bush, and residents can step from office blocks to a ridge path in the time it takes for a kettle to boil. Nature here is not a weekend drive away. It is the everyday backdrop. Some capitals weave water straight into daily life, and Ottawa in Canada is a perfect winter example. When cold settles over the Ottawa Valley, the Rideau Canal turns from a boating route into a ribbon of ice stretching from downtown to Dow's Lake. Skaters lace up at little huts, warm fingers on hot chocolate, and drift past Parliament in the clear bite of midwinter air. It is widely billed as the world's longest skating rink, not a stadium but a city street made seasonal. In spring the blades go away, the boats return, and the same channel becomes a leafy promenade for cyclists and strollers, one piece of infrastructure, two very different cities. Bangkok in Thailand still moves along its klongs, the canals that thread neighbourhoods like watery alleys. Long-tail boats and commuter ferries zip down Klong Sayan Sayep. Vendors moor beside wooden steps, and temples face the water with little piers. These channels are not just shortcuts, they are part of the flood plan. When monsoon storms arrive, klongs act as buffers, carrying excess water off the streets and toward the Sao Phraya. The result is a capital that keeps a foot on the dock and a hand on the rail, treating its canal network as both a transport grid and a safety valve. Amsterdam in the Netherlands, its constitutional capital, is a city drawn around water with draftsman's precision. Concentric canals curve out from the centre like tree rings: Herengracht, Keizersgracht, Prinsengracht, each lined with gabled houses and brick bridges. What began as merchant geometry, built for warehousing and barge access, now reads as leisure. Houseboats moored under plane trees, cyclists gliding over humpbacked spans, cafe tables balanced just above the shimmer. The ring of canals shapes everything from postal routes to how sunlight falls into narrow rooms, proof that a 17th century drainage and shipping scheme can still organise 21st century life with grace. Hanoi in Vietnam cools its pace beside lakes. Hoan Kiem, Truche Bac, and the broad sweep of Westlake sit like blue rooms in a monsoon city, their edges steadily restored into promenades where banyans cast shade and evening air slips over the water. A red bridge steps to Ngok Son Temple. Joggers circle at dawn, and fishermen settle along stone embankments by dusk. The lakes do quiet engineering as well, moderating heat, catching runoff, and making room for paths when streets are crowded. In Hanoi, the good walk is often a waterside one, and the city plans accordingly. Brasilia in Brazil shaped Paranoá Lake on purpose. Damming the local rivers during construction of the new capital created a broad reservoir that raises humidity, tamps down dust, and sends breezes across the Planalto. Today the shoreline hosts embassies, parks, and the sweeping arcs of bridges like Juscelino Kubitschek, while sailors tack across open water within sight of the esplanade of ministries. What could have been only a scenic backdrop is also climate infrastructure, a man-made lake helping a high, dry capital feel gentler for much of the year. Reykjavik in Iceland taps hot rock to make a maritime climate even kinder. Geothermal plants push warm water through a vast district heating network to homes, schools, and beloved public pools where people talk through winter in steaming blue. In select downtown spots, pipes also thread beneath pavements and steps so snow and ice melt away without salt or shovels, keeping streets walkable when North Atlantic squalls blow in. Harbours may define the shoreline, but it is the invisible water below ground, the heat carried by pipes, that turns a northern capital into somewhere you can stroll comfortably in January. Rome in Italy frames whole avenues with stone pines, the umbrella-shaped Pinus Pinea that throw cool parasol silhouettes over forums, piazzas, and traffic alike. Many were planted in the late 19th and early 20th centuries to give structure and shade, and they became part of the city's skyline as surely as domes and campanili. On hot afternoons, the trees scent the air with resin. In winter, their evergreen crowns keep streets green when plane trees stand bare. The species earns its keep twice, beauty above, pine nuts in the cones, and those long level canopies make every stroll past ruins feel theatrically staged against a Mediterranean sky. Madrid in Spain centres a good share of daily life on El Retiro, a royal retreat turned democratic backyard. Laid out for the Habsburg court and opened fully to the public after upheavals in the 19th century, it now gives the capital a boating lake ringed by terraces, chestnut alleys ideal for evening walks, and the glassy Palacio de Cristal from 1887 reflecting over a pond of palms. Joggers, readers, puppet shows and protest gatherings all share the same landscape, which is why the park feels like a civic living room rather than a fenced garden. Even in a city of broad boulevards, El Retiro is where Madrid goes to breathe. Paris in France balances itself with a pair of great woods set like bookends, the Bois de Boulogne to the west and the Bois de Vincennes to the east. Napoleon III's park makers carved lakes, islands and meandering rides through former hunting grounds, laying out a pastoral antidote to the dense boulevards of the centre. Today you can row a boat beneath willows in Boulogne in the morning and cycle past Vincennes Zoo and Arboretum in the afternoon, all without ever leaving the city. These are not just lungs, they're classrooms of landscape design where 19th century ideas about nature, leisure and public health still work for 21st century crowds. Singapore, the city-state capital, takes city in a garden from slogan to street map. Park Connector routes lace reservoirs, mangroves and neighbourhood greens into a continuous network so you can ride for hours under rain trees and palms and barely touch a main road. Vertical gardens climb hotel facades and housing blocks, sky bridges stitch parks across highways, and the super trees at gardens by the bay turn shade into spectacle. The payoff is ecological as well as aesthetic. Smooth-coated otters patrol rivers again, hornbills find perches in restored woods, and even in equatorial heat the generous leaf cover shaves degrees from pavements. Here, greenery is not an afterthought, it is infrastructure. London in the United Kingdom weaves its royal parks into a green chain that runs right through the heart of government. Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens merge into open water and meadows, Green Park and St James's Park, funnel you straight toward Buckingham Palace, where parade grounds host pageantry by day, and lawns fill with picnics by dusk. Northward, Regent's Park and Primrose Hill swap swans for skyline views. To the southwest, Richmond Park keeps ancient oaks and free-roaming deer within the city boundary. The thread through all of them is access. Gates open early, paths are well kept, and a crowded metropolis gets room to stretch. Washington, D.C. in the United States makes spring a festival under clouds of cherry blossoms, many descended from trees gifted by Japan in 1912. The tidal basin becomes a soft ring of white and pink around the Jefferson Memorial. Petals gather in little drifts along the water's edge, and whole neighbourhoods plan their walks around the peak bloom. The spectacle is more than pretty timing, it is a ritual that ties landscape to diplomacy, reminding the capital that friendship can be planted, tended and admired by anyone with a free afternoon and a camera. Repair and resilience can be as visible as a river returned to daylight. In South Korea, Seoul tore down an elevated highway and brought Cheonggyecheon back to the surface, turning a noisy slab of concrete into a shaded stream with paths, stepping stones and small falls. Summer heat softened along the corridor, dragonflies and birds returned, and lunchtime crowds traded exhaust for cool air and running water. Traffic did not vanish from the city, but the centre gained a living spine where stormwater, ecology, and commuters share the same revived channel. In the Philippines, Manila treats parks as part of the flood plan. Along rivers and low-lying districts, New open spaces are designed to drink the monsoon, lawns and courts that hold water during cloudburst, then drain back to playing fields and markets when the sky clears. Retention basins sit under plazas and beside schools, catching runoff that once rushed straight into streets. It is an approach that turns recreation into insurance. Places to walk and rest in the dry season, valves that lower risk when the rain arrives by the bucket. Denmark's capital, Copenhagen, sculpts cloudburst streets so that sudden storms follow a script. Curbs are lowered in chosen stretches, pocket basins wait at corners, and planted swales run like green gutters to parks designed to fill first. When the heavens open, water moves like a temporary river along routes meant for it. When the sun returns, those same streets read as calm bike lanes and play spaces. Projects in neighbourhoods such as Österbro show how paving, planting and subtle slopes can carry a city through intense downpours without panic. Ethiopia's highland capital, Addis Ababa, relies on fast-growing eucalyptus belts planted since the reign of Menelik II. These shelter belts fringe neighbourhoods with quick shade, supply poles and firewood on short rotations, and hold soils on steep rain-cut hills. The species has its critics. Thirsty roots and dense leafful need careful management, but in a city short on timber the stands act like living warehouses and windbreaks. Mixed plantings and managed coppice are steadily improving the balance between urban need and watershed health. Kathmandu in Nepal is bringing traditional water back to work. Stone spouts known as hiti, or Dunge Dara, once drew from gravity-fed aquifers and royal canals. Many fell into disrepair as pipes and pumps took over. Restoration projects now unblock channels, recharge wells, and rebuild the carved basins, letting clear, cool water return to neighbourhood courtyards. Beyond heritage value, the revivals add resilience, backup sources during shortages, cooler microclimates around the spouts, and public spaces where a city of tight lanes finds shade and rest. Quito in Ecuador keeps a green shoulder beneath the volcano Pichincha, protecting slopes that might otherwise slide during heavy Andean rains. Forest reserves, parks, and trail networks hold the line above the city, soaking up runoff before it becomes trouble, and giving residents quick access to highland air. On clear days, the teleferico lifts walkers toward ridge paths. On wet ones, the vegetated buffer does quieter work, stabilizing soils and feeding springs. The compromise is elegant: keep the mountains close, but let the trees, not rooftops, meet the sky at the city's edge. Some capitals play by unusual geographic rules, and they are all the more memorable for it. Tucked high in the Pyrenees, Andorra la Vella in Andorra is the highest capital in Europe, a snug bowl of roofs where mountain ridges lean close and meltwater hurries past shop fronts. The town sits where two fast streams, the Valira del Nord and the Valira d'Orient, join to become the Gran Valira, so bridges arrive before boulevards and footpaths hug the water. Winters bring crisp air and bright snow on the surrounding slopes. Summers trade skis for hiking boots in minutes. Romanesque churches in grey stone, duty-free storefronts, and a steady flow of visitors all fit into a compact centre that feels both alpine and urban. Geography does the talking here. A sovereign capital perched roughly 1,000 metres up, still close enough to the clouds to feel the mountains in every direction. On the other side of Eurasia, Baku in Azerbaijan lives below zero on the altitude scale, a Caspian shore city about 28 metres under global sea level. The reason is simple and fascinating. The Caspian is a landlocked basin with no outlet to the world ocean, so its surface sits lower and rises and falls with climate rather than tides. The Absheron Peninsula gives Baku a natural breakwater, while local winds, the cool Khazri and the warm Gilavar, sweep along seafront boulevards with satisfying regularity. Being below sea level shapes engineering as much as trivia. Foundations, drainage, and harbour works all answer to a water table that sits unusually high for a capital. Add in a long petroleum history and modern landmarks like the Flame Towers, and you have a low-lying city that looks slightly up at the rest of the world's seas. Nuuk in Greenland is one of the least populous capitals on Earth, yet it sprawls along a fjord so vast that scale is set by landscape rather than people. Colourful houses perch on rock ribs, sled dockyards sit a short wander from ministries, and ferries and water taxis stitch peninsulas where roads would be long detours. The Sermitsiaq Massif stands watch across the water, turning commutes into postcard views when the air turns clear and cold. As the seat of Greenland's self-rule within the Kingdom of Denmark, Nuuk blends fishing port, university town, and administrative centre in a population you could fit into a sports arena. The fjord, however, could swallow whole cities. Proof that in the Arctic, geography writes in capital letters while demography whispers. Bolivia divides the work of capital between two high-altitude cities with very different feels. Sucre, in the temperate valleys, holds the constitutional title and the Supreme Court, its whitewashed streets and tiled roofs earning the nickname the White City. La Paz, dramatically set in a canyon on the edge of the Andean Plateau, hosts the seat of government, presidency, parliament and ministries, and links to the sprawling city of El Alto on the rim above by an everyday network of cable cars. The split is tidy to remember. Constitution and highest court in Sucre, day-to-day national government in La Paz. One country, two capitals, and a lesson in how law and logistics can choose different addresses. Valletta in Malta is a fortress capital turned cultural jewel, a tiny headland packed with bastions that command two superb natural harbours, Grand Harbour on one side, Marsamxett on the other. Raised in the late 16th century by the Knights of St. John after the Great Siege of 1565, the city was built on a tight grid with steep, breezy streets and sturdy limestone ramparts. Within a footprint of well under a square kilometre sit Baroque palaces, the richly decorated St. John's Co Cathedral, theatres, markets, and steps that fall straight to the sea. A UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of Europe's smallest capital cities by area, Valletta shows how military geometry can become walkable elegance once the cannons fall silent. Some capitals show their character in small decisions, and Thimphu in Bhutan makes a clear choice: no traffic lights. The city tried signals briefly, then returned to an officer in a kiosk conducting flows with practiced balletic gestures. Roundabouts, human-scaled crossings and modest volumes do the rest. The absence of gantries and countdown timers is not nostalgia. It is policy about pace and visibility on streets lined with Bhutanese architectural forms and prayer flags. Visitors notice the calm. Residents know the choreography. In a world of red, amber, green, Thimphu proves that courteous drivers and clear sight lines can still run a capital's day. Bangkok in Thailand carries a ceremonial name that reads like a poem, one of the longest city names in the world. Locals often shorten it to Krung Thep, City of Angels, but the full title flows on to praise royal grace, 9 precious gems and enduring prosperity. The effect is more than flourish. You hear pieces of the name in songs, see them on official scrolls and learn them in schoolrooms, a reminder that cities can wear stories as part of their identity. Bangkok's everyday nickname is short and brisk. The ceremonial name is a breathless hymn to the idea of a capital. Vatican City, an enclave within Rome in Italy, is the smallest sovereign capital on Earth, and also a spiritual seat that draws a worldwide tide of visitors. Less than 1 square kilometre in area and home to fewer than 1,000 residents, it nonetheless manages crowds by the tens of thousands on feast days. The weekly rhythm shows up in movement. Audiences on Wednesdays, the Angelus at noon on Sundays, pilgrimage peaks around Easter and Christmas. Bernini's colonnades frame the queues, museums meter entries through galleries, and the city-state's tiny streets flex between calm and ceremony. Here, faith sets the footfall more than office hours do. Jerusalem in Israel, its status disputed in international forums, concentrates holy places of several faiths in close quarters, and the ritual calendars literally set the traffic. Friday midday prayers swell around the old city's gates. Sabbath quiet begins at sunset on the same day, and lifts buses from many routes until the following evening. Christian processions claim lanes during Holy Week. Ramadan nights turn some streets into flowing, festive promenades. Police plan rolling closures like stage managers. Shopkeepers adjust delivery hours. Residents learn detours by season. Few capitals make daily logistics follow sacred time as visibly as this one. In Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar lets winter write the events calendar. When deep cold settles, stretches of the Toul and Selby rivers and nearby lakes freeze hard enough for pop-up skating, ice sculptures, and outdoor concerts, while parks host winter sports days that feel as communal as they are brisk. Temperatures can dip well below -20 degrees Celsius, so organisers pair festivities with heated tents, tea stalls, and short programme slots that keep people moving. The same city that battles inversions and bitter nights turns ice into a civic stage, proving that climate can be a partner in public life, not only a problem to endure. Wind, fog, rain, altitude. Some capitals live at the edges of weather and make it their signature. Down at the pinch of Cook Strait, Wellington in New Zealand ranks among the windiest capitals on Earth. The roaring 40s funnel straight through the harbour gap and over steep ridges, so the city braces for gusts with handrails, wind-hardy street trees, and buildings oriented to shed the shove. Architects favour sheltered courtyards, bus planners think about lee sides for stops, and even public art is fixed with extra care. Calm days bring huge blue skies, blustery ones paint the bay with white caps. Either way, Wellington is a lesson in designing with wind rather than wishing it away. On the Pacific Rim, Lima in Peru proves that a seaside capital can also be a desert city. Annual rainfall is measured in mere millimetres, yet the place is often wrapped in a cool, grey marine layer known as garua. The cold Humboldt Current chills the air offshore, capping it and squeezing out rain before it reaches land. Life and parks depend on the rivers that tumble from the Andes, the Rimac, Chillon and Lurin, channeled into reservoirs and irrigation. The result is a fog-cooled metropolis where shade trees, careful water budgeting and old canal alignments matter more than umbrellas. Over in West Africa, Monrovia in Liberia swaps scarcity for abundance and then some. Monsoon months deliver downpours that add up to roughly 4,600 millimetres a year, making it one of the wettest capitals anywhere. Streets, markets and mangroves share the same low ground, so drainage is as essential as bridges. Rooflines stretch wide with verandas, gutters work hard, and daily life keeps a rhythm with the rain. Sudden squalls, bright breaks, then another drumming on tin. The reward is lushness, palms overhanging stalls, breadfruit shading yards and green that never entirely steps back. Quito in Ecuador sits high near the equator, so thin air and strong sun meet in the same breath. At roughly 2,850 metres, days are mild and nights crisp, while the equatorial sun at noon throws short, intense shadows that make hats and arcades practical kit. The city threads along a narrow Andean bench beneath the Pichincha volcano, with neighbourhoods running lengthwise and climbing spurs wherever they can. Day length hardly changes through the year, giving a steady daily rhythm despite the altitude. 12 hours of light, cool air, and a skyline that always seems within reach of the clouds. Nowhere puts government higher than La Paz in Bolivia, the world's loftiest seat of government. The administrative core sits in a steep bowl around more than 3,600 metres, while the partner, city of El Alto, sprawls across the rim above 4,000 metres. Thin air rewrites routines, water boils sooner, climbs feel longer, and the city has answered its extreme topography with skyways. The Mittelferico cable car network links rim to valley in minutes, gliding over what used to be hour-long road trips. Look up and you see mountains. Look down and you see a capital that learned to knit vertical distance into everyday life. And that brings our quiet tour to a close. Capitals are not just dots on a political map. They are decisions written into land and water, into wind patterns and rail lines, into rituals, parks, and the streets we walk every day. Some are inland gestures pulling a country toward its centre. Some are salt-edged harbours. A few are purpose-built manifestos. Many are simply old towns that learned new jobs remarkably well. If one thread runs through them all, it is this. Geography doesn't just surround a capital, it explains it. If you're still awake, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and one detail about your own capital that locals know but guidebooks miss. If this kept you company, a gentle like and a subscribe help more sleepy travellers find their way here, and thank you to everyone already along for the ride. Now let the night do the rest. As you drift off, hold a small question. Which city shaped its country the most? The one by the river mouth? The one under the mountain? Or the one someone drew into being and set in the middle of the map?